Let's talk about cross-site request forgery. Cross-site request forgery is one of the simplest and most dangerous web vulnerabilities. To exploit the vulnerability, the adversary forces a user's browser to send a request to a resource where the user was authenticated to perform an action. The key point here is that the user must be authenticated to the vulnerable resource. The essence of the vulnerability is based on the specifics of the HTTP protocol operation. Let's look at how the attack is conducted. Each time a browser sent a request to a server where the user was authenticated, it set a cookie from its storage that matches the resource. How can the adversary provoke a browser to send a request? For example, they can send a user link by clicking on which a user browser will send a GET request. It's also possible to send such a request without provoking the user to click a link. You can place a link in the SRC parameter of the img tag and send a link to the page with this image. Then, the browser will send a request itself when loading the page trying to receive an image. Let's have a look at the example of how the attack usually happens. Under some pretext, the adversary forces the victim to switch to the resource under his control. The user opens this resource in the browser. The content of evil.com pages is loaded. In the contents of the page, there is an img tag, the SRC attribute of which refers to a vulnerable resource of which the user was authenticated. The SRC attribute was already set the necessary request parameters, for example, for money transfer. The browser will try to load the image and send the request to a vulnerable resource. Before submitting a request, it will check whether it was cookie for the resource in its storage, and if so, will place it in request. The server will check the cookie sent by a browser and will process the request. It won't return an image in its response, but the request will be executed because the user on whose behalf the request was made was authenticated, which is what the adversary needed. Since we have already explored the GET request, we can assume that POST request does not have such problem because it can be sent using img and tags. However, it can be generated using a tag form. To do this, we create a form with required parameters and then we can either wait for user to click Submit button or we can send this form automatically using JavaScript. How does testing work? First of all, you need to check that all requests that perform certain action have CSRF token. If there is a token, you need to make sure that it is being tested. To do this, you can remove the token or change it. If the request is executed and its result is the same with CSRF token, it means that the token is not checked and the attack can be conducted. How to protect yourself against CSRF vulnerability? First, use CSRF tokens. Each query that performs an action must contain a parameter that confirms that user has actually performed an action. For example, a server added a hidden parameter with some random value to each form when generating an HTML page. It would then check if it was present and if it matched when the user processed the request. It is important that these CSRF tokens are one-time and unique for each user. Let's do some practice.